fly away with me. Come and fly
A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity of visiting Old Mill Stud Farm in Newmarket. This is where I met Rob Speers, who is a bloodstock manager for Mr Araci. In this interview, I'll be talking to Rob about what it's like to be a bloodstock manager, the ins and outs of breeding, and what's happening on Old Mill Stud Farm. So, Rob Speers, thank you so much for joining me today. Now, you are a bloodstock agent, aren't you? So, for me, I don't know much about that side to the racing world, so I'm very intrigued to find out more. So I'd love to first of all know how you got into the industry.
Well, I don't come from a horsey background at all, but when I was younger I was into all sports, playing a lot of football, cricket, rugby, like most young boys, and I saw horse racing on the television one day, and I kept bugging my mum, telling her that I wanted to go horse racing or learn to ride a horse. And eventually she gave in and took me to the local riding school when I was about 11, 12 years old. And from there, riding and horses were always in the background along with other sports. And initially my interest wasn't racing. My initial interest was sport horses and show jumping and dressage. So that's where my initial interest in horses came from.
So did you then get into the breeding through the sport horses?
Yeah, so initially when I left school, I got a job at a show jumping yard before moving to Warwickshire College of Agriculture, where I studied equine science. And it was whilst I was there, during my placement, I worked at a dressage yard for a very famous dressage rider, Jenny Lawson-Clark, at Catherton Stud. She obviously had Olympic horses back in those days, such as Dutch Gold, and those Olympic class dressage horses also stood as stallions. So that was my first introduction to working with the stallions and the breeding stock, and I instantly decided that that was for me. And then on the back of that, when I went back to college, I investigated kind of the way forward, and I decided that that would be breeding racehorses and the racing industry.
After you then finished your studying, what was your first job out of that?
So my first job out of that was actually as a stud hand at Shadwell Stud for Sheikh Hamdan, where I was for about 18 months. And that was my first job post-college.
So what did that entail then?
So I obviously had horse knowledge and horse skills, having worked with horses, you know, at weekends and evenings, growing up after I started riding at the riding school. And then obviously through college that progressed. So by the time I went to Shadwell, I was very accustomed to working with horses and understood what, you know, the daily routine was. And it was a case of looking after mares and foals and mucking out and turning horses out and just general stud hand duties and being around the young thoroughbreds and young racehorses.
So was it a case of shadowing someone else, or at college did they prepare you for what it took to be a stud hand?
No, so the course I took at college was definitely not aimed at breeding and racing. It was just an equine science course, you know, and mainly probably geared towards what I had been doing and thought I was going to do, which was show jumping and dressage and eventing and sports horse. But it did involve a small part of a breeding module, and of course all of the equine science, nutrition, all of that type of thing was a good grounding for my future. But the majority of my learning, and the majority of learning that most people do when it comes to horses, is hands-on. You have to get your hands dirty and get involved.
Before I do move on, how would you sort of describe a bloodstock agent?
So I'm not a bloodstock agent. I'm a bloodstock and racing manager for Mr Araci would be my main role. I also am a consultant to one or two other people, including Asayl Bloodstock. And for me, it means that I am self-employed, but I get paid a retainer. So I don't work as an agent, as in on commissions, etc. I'm paid a salary. My main role is to oversee the oversee Mr Araci's horses here in the UK. And that's from everything from purchasing to managing them on a daily basis, to taking care of his accounts, to running everything for him, so he can concentrate on other things and his main job.
That's where I came to visit, wasn't it, 2 weeks ago, which was absolutely fantastic. But
yeah,
as I know, it's still sort of in progress of it's being built still, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So when that is fully developed, what is the sort of everyday role for you?
So Old Mill Stud has been a little bit of a labour of love. When we bought the farm almost 2 years ago now, it'd been a successful farm in the past and raised very good horses for the previous owners. But unfortunately, the previous owner passed away, which is why the farm was sold. But it hadn't had any work done to the farm for a significant period of time. The money that the people had made that were on the farm previously, they put into more stock and not necessarily into infrastructure. So the farm needed a big overhaul, but we knew that when we took it on, and it's something that I've really enjoyed doing. We've re-fenced all the paddocks, and we have stripped all of the barns out, redone them. We've demolished a couple of areas and built new barns, and we're in the process of building a new office and a new house as we speak. So that has been exciting, and it's just bringing the facilities right up to scratch for the modern day and for the high-end horses that we hope will grace the farm in years to come. Mr Araci has always bred horses, but his breeding and racing interests will now increase. Now he has his own place to keep them. He has his own house to come and stay in when he's here, because in the past the mares have boarded at other people's farms and we've paid for them to be there. But now we have our own place to be based from. The breeding operation will continue to expand, and I'd expect to see more of Mr Araci's horses both at the sale ring and more horses also running in our colours on the racetrack. So it's a natural progression from where we were maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it's very much a family thing for Mr Araci, as his daughter Pinar is hugely involved and loves the racing and the horses, and it's about putting the foundations in place for what we hope will be, you know, a successful breeding operation for years to come.
So do you think Mr Araci and his family will then move to the farm permanently?
So I don't think they'll move to the farm permanently, but Mr Araci, both of his daughters have British passports, and actually Pinar, one of Pinar's main interests has always been horses. She went to Reading University. She actually done the national stud course in Newmarket, and she's been for a long time the driving force behind the interest in racing and horses. So they obviously, Pinar, if she wanted, could come back to the UK at any time, but their home is Turkey. But they will very much enjoy having a house to be able to bring where Mr Araci can bring his family, bring his grandchildren, and be able to spend time with the horses and go racing and go to the sales, where for years they've had to use hotels. That's not the same as having your own farm.
And it'd be a beautiful place to stay as well, because it looks fantastic already. But I wanted to talk as well about the facilities, because one thing I found really, really interesting is when you said how, you know, you have to prepare it properly. For instance, the round fencing round the outside, is that all for protection for the foals?
Yeah, so we try to do everything we can to, you know, everything with horses. You know, they're animals, they can hurt themselves, you need luck all of the time, but all you can do when you're working with horses is do everything you can to put the odds in your favour. If you have a horse in a badly fenced post and wire field, it is much more likely to hurt itself than if it is in a post and rail field with boarded round corners where they don't. So it's a case of doing the very best we can for the stock that we have, and the boarded corners in the paddocks means there isn't a square. So if a horse is galloping down towards a corner, you know, it's a little bit like, if they don't stop in time, they're not going to slide into a corner and into a fence post. In theory, they should kind of bounce off the boarded corners a little bit. It also gives them a little bit of shelter from the wind and the rain when they're living out. But the main part of everything we do is thinking of of the safety and the need of the horses.
And another thing I found really interesting was what you said about the minerals in the grass. So it's so much to it, isn't it? So what happens then when you have to make the grass essentially perfect for the horses?
Well, whether you can ever get perfect grass, I don't know. Everyone's land is different. You know, the land that we have compared to maybe the land 10 miles away is the difference between clay soil or chalk soil, etc., etc. But it is important to produce the best grazing land you can, because for the development of young horses and basically athletes, a balanced diet with the right minerals is vital. In the same way that, you know, children need calcium for their bones and teeth, etc. It's no different for horses. And we're trying to produce young athletic horses who hopefully will race at 2 and 3 years old. So bone and skeletal development is vital. So the mineral intake and what they get from the grass and from their feed is very, very important, that they grow and develop at the right time, at the right speed, and they get the right minerals to do so. So as I explained to you when you were at the farm, we regularly take soil samples and we're able to test the soil to see the makeup of the soil, the pH levels, the mineral content. If we need to adjust the pH levels, we can do, and we've actually just put some lime on some of the yearling paddocks just because the pH was quite high and we want to lower the pH level. And then regarding the soil content and mineral content, if we're lacking anything, particularly, you know, if you're lacking calcium or you're lacking zinc in your soil, then you want to feed either a supplement to make up the difference, or you want to make sure that the hard feed you're using has the necessary amounts of minerals in it to cover what the horses might be missing. But it's a year-long process, because obviously grass grows differently at different times of year. During the winter, when it's cold and there's not much grass growing, the horses don't get a huge amount out of the grass and they need to be fed hard feed. And then in the spring, when the spring grass comes and you get that flush of grass and you get the sugar content and everything changes in it, then often you have to back off the hard feed because they're getting more from the grass. It's mainly about making sure that the horses grow in a constant level way whilst getting all of the minerals and vitamins that are required to form a good, strong skeletal system, which is vital for them when they become athletes at a later date.
So is it kind of like a bit of a trial and error situation where you have to monitor the ones 1 year and then see how they're growing and then perhaps change a few things if it's not quite right?
Well, look, on the whole, I've been doing it long enough now that, you know, I'm hoping the trial and error is over, because trial and error leads to problems with horses, which we're trying to avoid. And as I say, your eye is very important. You know, you can physically look at a horse and you can see, wow, I think that horse has got a little bit too fat. It's got a bit cresty of its neck. It's doing too well. And it's when young horses do too well that they put pressure on their joints and pressure on their growth plates, and their growth plates maybe try and grow too quickly. In the same way that, you know, children aged between 8 and 14, if they go through growth spurts, they can sometimes get sore joints, etc., etc. So it's a case of trying to control the growth. We do it, firstly, most importantly, I think the best way to do it is with your eye, but we also weigh from when the foals are born all the way until they go into training or go to a yearling sale. They're weighed on a monthly basis, and we also take a height measurement from them on a monthly basis, and all of that is plotted on a chart called through Saracens, who are the feed company we use, and it just shows on a graph. And what you want is that steady upward curve of growth and development. You don't want any sharp spikes and you don't want any sharp dips. If there's a sharp spike and the horse is growing too quickly and developing too fast, then you have to slow things down. And then vice versa, if a horse drops below the curve, then you might have to increase the feed and nutrition.
Do you yourself look at the horses and the yearlings every day, or do you have other people do that for you?
So I have a stud groom who lives on the farm. He has a house on the farm, and his job is the daily management of the farm. I have an office there, and I'm at the stud probably 3 or 4 days a week. if not more. And I make a point of, with the stud groom, seeing the horses, seeing all of the horses at least twice a week. And I think that's helpful, because sometimes if you live on the stud and you see the horses all day every day, you don't sometimes necessarily notice changes. It's no different if you look at a baby, or you look at your niece or nephew or whatever. If you look at them every day, you don't realize how much bigger they've got or how much they've grown. Where if you take a little bit of a step back and you see them a little less often, you can see the changes much easier. So I try to see every horse properly once or twice a week.
What do you look for in a good yearling?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. So obviously pedigree is important, and when you're breeding horses, I'm sure we'll get onto it later on, stallion, mare, pedigree is all important. And when it comes to horses, you want a thoroughbred horse to look like it should do. So if I look at a yearling, and the most important things for me are, what are the stallion, what is the mare, and what is the mare's stallion by, and what is the date of birth of the foal. And then with those things in my mind, I can picture what I think the horse should look like. If I'm looking at a horse at this time of year, a weanling, say, this year's foals, and it was born in May, I would expect it to still be, a little bit pot-bellied, having been weaned, a little bit backward, just starting to do well now, having been weaned from its mother on hard feed going into the winter. If it's a January foal and it was weaned 6 months ago, or it was weaned 4 or 5 months ago, you'd expect them to be stronger, more forward. So it's a case of understanding where they are in their development, and do they look like they should do for their date of birth and where they are. And then, of course, how well do they move? Do they look like athletes? Do they stretch when they walk? Do they push from behind? Do they use their hindquarters? Do they look powerful? Also, their attitude. Do they want to do it? We all see plenty of racehorses that sometimes you look at them, and there've been famous horses in the past, Mad Moose and whatever, that haven't always wanted to jump off at the start of a race and whatever. Attitude and the horse's heart and their eye. People say the key to a horse's soul is through its eye. Do they have a good eye? Do they want to do it? Do they want to please you? All of those things are really important to try and build a picture of the horse that you're working with. And just as importantly, from a stud farming point of view, to build a picture of the mare, the foal, the whole family, so you understand the family and how to make them going forward.
Have you ever had a situation where perhaps the yearling hasn't turned out how you thought it would?
Oh yeah, regularly. You can do everything that you can within your power to select the stallion that you think suits the mare. Sometimes you can have a foal that's born and wonderful and you're very happy with it, and they don't always develop into the horses that you want them to be. Also, it can happen the other way around. You can have a foal born that's weak and backward, and you can be disappointed with it. It can weigh maybe, a good weight for a foal when it's born is somewhere between kind of 52 and 56 kilos. Sometimes you can have a foal born and it's in the 40 kilos and it's weak, and you can be disappointed. But they can catch up in time, and they can keep developing and turn into something very smart. As I say, vice versa. You can have a foal that's born and looks wonderful, and you look at it as a yearling and be disappointed. So there's no guarantees in breeding and genetics, and you never know.
Do you have to price them yourself before they go to the sales?
So Mr Araci is both an owner breeder and a seller. We can sign some horses, we race some horses. I think in the future we will race more horses than we sell. We sold probably our better horses this year under the Old Mill Stud banner, because it was the first time Mr Araci had consigned under our own banner, and we wanted to make sure that we stood out and took good horses to the sales. And at the end of the day, like any auction, something is only worth what someone else is prepared to pay for it. And Mr Araci or other owners will have an opinion as to what they think it's worth. And somewhere in between there is the balance. And it means that you won't always sell everything you take to the sales. And if that's the case and you're happy with the horse and you don't get the value that you want for it, then you can take it home, and if you're in a position to be able to race it, and we're in that position, so we don't have to sell everything, and we don't have to undervalue the horses when they go to the sales. If they don't make what we want for them, we're happy to race them. And regarding valuing horses, it's very difficult. It's obviously done on pedigree. It's obviously done on the look of the horse, the way it moves, its constitution and conformation. But not every year is the same. You know, this year the yearling sales with COVID-19 were down about 33% across the board. So if you wanted to sell horses this year, you probably had to lower your expectations, because the world is going through a difficult time. So how to value the horse changes from year to year. It also changes from sale to sale, but you tend to get a feeling when you go to the sales. The yearlings would arrive at the sale probably 4 to 5 days before they sell, and they spend 4 or 5 days showing before they actually go through the ring and sell. So you have bloodstock agents and owners and people come down to see them, and you get a feeling from people as to whether they like a horse or not. And if they like it, they'll often come back and see it a second time. And if they like it the second time, then they'll often send a vet down to vet the horse and check the horse and make sure its x-rays and everything is good with it before they go and bid on it. So you get a feel from kind of how much activity and interest there is in the horse as to whether as to where you are when it comes to valuation.
And with buying, is it a case of going to lots of different sales, or do you tend to stick to the ones that you know?
Yeah, so there are many sales across Europe. We tend to operate with the main 3 sales companies in Europe. Tattersalls here in Newmarket, Doncaster Sales, which is part of Goffs UK and Goffs Doncaster. So I would spend most of my time at the sales in Tattersalls, Goffs in Ireland, and also Acana in France. They're the 3 main sales when it comes to horses in Europe. They obviously sell horses in other places too. The Bragg sales in Germany, you can often pick up good horses there. But they're the main 3 sales that we would concentrate on if we're looking to add more stock to the farm or the racing arm.
So would you accompany Mr Araci to the sales and perhaps advise him and give him your opinion?
So the way it works is we very much work as a team. Myself, Mr Araci and Pinar. The catalogues get posted to everyone around the world. So Mr Araci get a catalogue, I get one. And what normally happens, if it's say a mare sale and the mare sale starts on the Tuesday, I would start looking at the mares normally as of the Friday or Saturday. And between myself, Mr Araci and Pinar, we would have come up with a list of mares that we like on pedigree. Because at the end of the day, you know, we have kind of goals for the stud. We know the type of pedigrees that we want and the type of mares that we want. And we would significantly reduce the size of the catalogue by looking on pedigree alone. Once we've done that, I would then spend 2.5 days looking at all of those mares on the list before Mr Araci and Pinar arrive. And I would probably wipe off 2/3 of them because they aren't the size, shape, you know, they aren't the type of mares that I like or that we like. And then at that point, when Mr Araci arrives, we'll go and look at what is then kind of called the short list. There's often about 35 mares left on the list by then, and we'll go and look at them. And Mr Araci is very knowledgeable. He loves his horses, understands his racing. He knows what he likes and he doesn't like. So he'll then tell me out of those mares which he likes and which he doesn't, and that will cut the list again. And then we're left with a list of horses that we both like the pedigrees on and we both like as individuals. And at that point, he'd sometimes ask me for advice as to what I think they might make, you know, how strong the sale is going to be, what type of money it might cost to to buy them, and I often write down in his catalogue what I think their value would be, and then we'd sit together in the ring when they go through when they're being sold, and you know, I leave at the end of the day. It's Mr Araci's money, and I advise him, but he enjoys bidding and he bids himself. And you know, there are times when I wish he'd go on and bid a little bit more. There are also times when I wish he'd stop because I think he's bidding too much. So, but he's his own man, and him and Pina are really good horse people, and they understand the horses that they like. And if they really like something and they want to buy it, and I've given them all of the information, then you know, if they pay a little bit over what I think, as long as they're happy, that's all that matters.
When you go to the sales, how many do you have in mind that you will buy?
And that again depends on year to year. We bought 3 high-end mares from the December sales last year for a lot of money, because we had just moved the stock onto the stud last November, and we wanted to, you know, add 3 good quality mares to the farm with the view that, you know, trying to find some blue hen mares and build families for the future. There is a December sale coming up in Newmarket despite the current lockdown, and there is going to be a foal and a mare sale. And at some point in the next week to 10 days, I'll have that conversation with Mr Araci and Pina as to what our budget is and what we look to do this year. And it depends on numbers. It depends on how many fillies in training that we're going to retire to be mares at the stud and what we sell on. Because if you're not careful, if you're buying horses and racing horses and retiring them to stud, it's very easy for 10 or 12 mares to become 18, 20 mares very quickly. And for the size of farm that we are at the moment, although we're looking to expand the stud in the future, for the size of farm at the moment, we're pretty set on numbers of around 15 to 16 mares and their followers for the next couple of years, and we already have 11 mares on the farm, probably 2 more to come from Turkey, which will be 13, and we have 2 very well bred fillies in training, one of which will probably definitely retire this year, the other may race on next year. So we need to put everything together, and you often see that a year a stud farm might step in and buy 2 or 3 mares because they've sold a couple or they left horses in training. There'll be other years when you feel that your numbers and stock levels are right and you don't need more. So it's something that changes on a yearly basis for every stud farm.
How long would you keep a mare for breeding?
Well, you know, our youngest mare was covered as a 4-year-old last year, and she'll have her first foal next year as a 5-year-old. Our oldest mare, Vasilia, she's 16 this year, and she'll be 17 next year. And mares can happily breed away into their early 20s. So, you know, in theory, brood mares can have a 18, 19, even 20-year career. We will be looking to produce high quality horses. So you normally know from a mare within her first 3 to 4 runners whether she's going to do it. So by the time the mare is 10 to 12 years old or whatever, she would have had hope, you know, if they have their first foal as a 5-year-old, first runner as a 7-year-old, second runner as an 8-year-old, 9, 10. By the time they're 10 or 11, they've probably had 4 runners on the track, and you've had a chance to assess their foals and their yearlings that they produce. You've probably sent the mare to a different stallion 2 or 3 times, so you've seen different crosses. And by then you have an idea as to whether this mare is going to be suitable and good enough to produce the quality of horses that we're looking for. And at that point, if they're not, there are probably 2 options for us. Mr Araci has 4 stallions in Turkey, and he has upwards of 45, 50 mares in Turkey, and we breed and race a lot of horses in Turkey as well. So 1 or 2 of the mares that aren't up to the grade for what we're looking for in the UK, in the past they've gone down to Turkey and had successful careers as broodmares down there. Or of course, we can sell them on back at the broodmare sales here in the UK. And just because they might not be the level that we're looking for doesn't mean that they won't do a very good job for other people.
And those mares at the sales, have most of them come off the track?
So the majority of mares that you would be buying at the sales have probably raced at some point in their lives and have retired and been covered. Some mares might be 10, 12 years old, the type of mares that I'm talking about, that haven't worked out for the people that have them, but they'll be good mares for other people. Some mares are proven mares that people have bred a Group 1 horse out of, or bred good horses out of, and they're selling the mare because they're now worth significant amounts of money. You also get plenty of mares turn up that are unraced, fillies that got an injury in training or didn't show enough when they were in training to suggest that they might be good horses, but they're well related. They have brothers and sisters, or they're from good families, and they still have a future as broodmares, even though they're unraced, maybe because they weren't very good or because they've had an injury.
If you see a horse, well, a mare on the track that you like the look of, how do you then go about getting hold of that mare once it's retired? Do you have to wait until it goes to the sale?
Well, one thing that a bloodstock agent would do, and me in my role as a racing and bloodstock manager, if you specifically see a horse in training or a filly in training that you want, private sales are a huge part of the racing industry, whether that be colts being brought to go to Hong Kong or America, or horses to be brought to go down under for Australia. Horses in training, private sales are a huge part of our industry, and certainly you can make inquiries about well-bred fillies and privately. The majority of them, if they're owned by people that are breeders, unless you're prepared to offer them way over the odds of what they might be worth, they tend to want to keep them and breed them for themselves. Or if they're going to sell, they'll take them to public auction, because sometimes at public auction, if you've got two people that really want a horse, you can end up getting double what you thought you might get for it, because the auction will value it.
And I've never seen an auction, so does it get quite heated if you've got lots of people bidding on one horse?
Certainly this year it is. It's not possible for people to attend with COVID, but anyone that has an interest in racing or breeding horses, I really recommend that you come down to Tattersalls, or if you live in Ireland, maybe to Goths, and go to one of the major sales, whether it be Tattersalls Book 1 Yearling sales or the Tattersalls Mare sale on the Tuesday and Wednesday when the big horses sell. It is real pure theatre, is the only way to describe it, and horses changing hands for a lot of money, a lot of pressure on people, but it's an amazing atmosphere when you get those really big horses walking through the rings, selling sometimes for millions of pounds. You can cut the atmosphere like a knife through butter. It is, it really is a wonderful experience, and anyone that has an interest in it, whether it be through Discover Newmarket, who I think do sales tours, or whether they do it off their own back with someone that they know within the industry, I'd get to a sale, because it would give you a real understanding of how how horses are traded and how it works.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I'd do, because I'd love to see it. I mean, I've only seen bits of footage and stuff from Twitter, but it looks incredible.
Yeah, when the big horses sell on the big occasions, and the ring is full and it's standing room only, and there's that real atmosphere, and often it can be fairy tales. Some of these horses that are sold for big money, that were brought maybe, it's not unheard of for someone, a small syndicate, to buy a filly for 30 or 40 grand, and she turn out to be a champion and win a Group 1, and then she goes to the sale and she makes £2 or £3 million and sells, and it's life-changing money for people, and to witness that type of thing is a wonderful experience.
It's a bit like that story of Dream Alliance, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So with stallions, where are they then? Are they at a completely different farm?
Yeah, so most stallions stand at stallion-specific farms. So the stallions and mares are kept apart, and the major stallion farms would also, the major stallion farms, the likes of Darley, Sheikh Mohammed, Coolmore, and alike, They obviously have mares as well, but they're kept, there'd be large properties and they're kept apart. So there are specific stallion farms, and basically the mares travel to the stallions. So so when you book your nominations, if you're booking a nomination for a mare and the stallion stands in Ireland, then at some point during the breeding season, you have to get your mare on a lorry and you ship her across to Ireland so she can be covered. So the mares always travel to the stallions.
I remember I think you said it when I came to visit, when you pair your mare and stallion, you sort of have opposing traits to hopefully then work together, don't you? Something like
that. So look, you want to match a stallion and a mare on pedigree, first of all, which is really important. And it's very important, particularly at the moment, because some stallions in Europe over recent times have become very dominant. There are lots of Galileos, lots of sons of Galileos. There's lots of invincible spirits and sons of invincible spirits to start with. And genetically, they've got to match. So you've got to find, personally, I don't like inbreeding too close. So I prefer not to inbreed. So I prefer to match an outcross stallion to a mare. So firstly, you've got to find something that suits on pedigree. And secondly, you then have to match them. A long distance staying horse who maybe stayed 1.5 miles, 1.6 miles, or was a Ascot Gold Cup type of horse on a very fast mare doesn't always work. Often you end up with something that has no speed, no staying power, and is just one paced and not any good. In the same way that if you have a mare who was very slow, she won her races over a long distance. If you cover her with a very fast horse, again, you often end up with something with no staying power and no speed and something in the middle. So I like to try and cover mare and stallion like for like. So if you've got a mare who was a miler, I like to try and cover her with a miler or a 10 furlong stallion, and vice versa. I don't think extremes necessarily work, and physically they have to match. If you have a mare, and this is what I talk about when I say about understanding your mares and developing families. If you have a mare and she's quite small and her first two foals are a little bit small, and you think, well, I wish you were a little bit bigger when they go into training. Do you know what I mean? You want to look for a stallion who is physically big and strong, imposing, and might be half a hand or an inch or two bigger than her, to try and put some size and strength and scope on the mare. And then the same is the opposite, the other way around. If you have a really big mare, if you have a mare and she's 16.3, 16.2, 16.3, and she produces big foals year in, year out, then you might want to look for a slightly smaller, more compact stallion for her, so she breeds a more level, more normal size horse rather than a big horse all of the time.
Do you ever get a situation where you've got a favourite stallion that tends to suit more mares on the farm? Yeah,
and that can certainly happen, because if you end up with a good mare and she breeds 2 or 3 good horses, or a couple of good horses maybe by the same stallion, and that stallion suits the family, then of course you want to access that stallion or that stallion line for that family going forward, because there are some crosses that just work really well. Galileo is probably the best stallion in the world and has been for a significant period of time. He crosses particularly well with Danehill. And there are plenty of other stallions that they nick and cross very well with certain mares. So once you understand your family and you understand the mares and you understand the crosses that work, then naturally you get drawn to certain stallions, and then you have to work out the budget and how much money you want to spend, because the most expensive stallions in the world run from hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds for a nomination, down to some stallions, down to 5,000 to 10,000, so or less. So there's a broad spectrum of nomination fees and stallions to choose from, and you have to get the right balance between horses that match on pedigree, that match physically, and that come into the right price bracket, because not everyone can spend £150,000 on a nomination.
And just going back to when you said about the breeding lines, how close can those breeding lines be? Because I know you said you don't like to do that, but for someone else, how close can it be?
Yeah, I mean, 2x2 and 2x3 inbreeding is not unheard of, and doesn't necessarily cause any problems for the horses. And inbreeding to Galileo has been successful. Jim Bolger has done it regularly, and this year's Dewhurst winner, champion two-year-old, it'd be worth anyone listening to this, if you pull up his pedigree and look at his pedigree, he is an inbred horse. It works. It often produces fast horses, and it's not a problem. And it's not a problem for the horse. But what it does for the future is shrink the gene pool down even further. And as I say, when you have dominant stallions for a period of time, you end up with a lot of their genes, a lot of their sons and a lot of their daughters all at stud, and it starts to shrink the gene pool a little bit. And that's why sometimes dominant stallions, although wonderful for the people that own them, actually is not always a good thing for racing and genetics, because we need diversity and we need outcross stallions. And it's why at the moment you see a lot of American blood coming back into the UK with Scat Daddy and No Nay Never and Justify, and you see horses like American Pharaoh, and you see outcross stallions being very popular, because otherwise, if you're not careful, the genetics and gene pool gets saturated by one stallion line.
Because I would have thought with, inbreeding, you'd have problems with joints and muscular problems, but I suppose that's not really a common thing.
No, look, as long as it's obviously different to human beings, and it depends how close you go in breeding. I mean, there is a limit to what people will do, but as I say, for me, it doesn't do the horses any harm. It produces good race horses. A lot of people will do it. It's not necessarily a commercial thing to do. I think a lot of owner breeders will do it if they're going to breed something to race. Sometimes it can be frowned on a little bit on the commercial market if you look at a mare's pedigree and you're looking at a yearling and it's that inbred. And I say the main reason for it not being my cup of tea and the industry's cup of tea is because it just shrinks the gene pool. Because where do you go if you buy a filly who's inbred, or you've got a stallion who's really inbred? What happens if they're a good filly or they're a very good horse? When they go to stud, their breeding futures are restricted, because they are, genetically they're only going to suit certain horses.
It's really interesting. When you said that was the first thing I thought of. I just thought of all these problems that could potentially happen. So just going back then to when you send the mare off to the stallion, do you then just hand that over to the stallion's team, or do you have to go as well and look after the mare?
Yeah, so there's two ways of doing it. So we're based in Newmarket, and if we're covering a mare with a Newmarket stallion, we would do something which is called a walk-in cover. So we would vet the mare with our vet. A mare has basically a 21-day cycle, and they cycle after they give birth, and we check them through their estrus, through their heat, and when they're in season, we check them probably once a day or once every 2 days, and we scan them and we check their follicles, and we know when they're getting close to ovulation. We can normally pinpoint ovulation by following their follicle development along to within 24 hours. So when we know they're getting really close to ovulating, we would call the stallion farm and we would book a time for the coverer. The stallions would cover normally on average 3 times a day, normally a 7 o'clock covering, a lunchtime covering, and then an evening covering. And you get your slot, and we would put the mare on the lorry and we would drive her to the stallion farm, and we would unload the mare. At that point, we give the mare to the staff at the stallion farm. They would hold her. The mare's covered. She then comes back to us, and 48 hours after that, we'll check her with the scanner to make sure she's ovulated, And if she's ovulated and clean and everything's well, fingers crossed she's in foal at 16 days, which is when we would scan them again at 16 days, and we know that early as to whether they're in foal or not. If they're going abroad and they're going off to Ireland, you tend to send them to the boarding to the stud where the stallion is, and you leave them there for 2 or 3 weeks so they can be checked through a heat period, covered, scanned in foal. And when you're happy that they're scanned in foal and there's no problems, you bring them back then, because obviously if they don't go in foal first time round, when the mare comes back into season, you'll cover them again. So that's the 2 ways of doing it. You either walk them in if it's close enough to do so, or you send them off to a boarding farm or the stud farm that do it for you.
So you don't have to introduce the mare and the stallion beforehand?
No. So the most stallion farms will have a teaser, often a pony stallion, and they will, before you present the mare to the stallion that day, they'll often use the teaser just to jump her and make sure she's properly in season, because obviously the stallions are worth an awful lot of money, and you don't want to make any mistakes and the mare be ovulated before she gets there, or be difficult, because you don't want to get the stallion kicked. But no, the stallion would meet the mare there and then in the covering shed.
And because obviously they're so expensive, are there any safety precautions put into place, as in travel boots, when the mare is being covered? Does she have padding or?
So when the mares are being checked beforehand, they're obviously checked in padded stocks, and they're obviously well looked after when they're travelling. When they are covered, obviously as long as you've got the timing right, which 99 times out of 100 with the quality of the vet work and the process these days, the timing is right, then the mare is right to be covered, if that makes sense. And it is a natural thing, and both stallion and mare are I need to phrase this the right way, are in the right mood for what's occurring. But to be safe, the mares will have on their hind legs, they'll have big padded covering boots. So if for whatever reason she was to lash out or kick, then if she was to kick the stallion, then he's protected and has padding. And sometimes when a stallion jumps on a mare's back, to stop him slipping off or to get in the right position, he'd sometimes bite down on their neck. So often they would put a leather cover over the mare's neck. So if he does bite down on her, he just bites down on the leather and not on the mare, because occasionally that can make the mare kick out as well. And
then for her safety when she's back at the stud, is she, yep, from when we saw your stables, they're bedded up with straw quite high. Is there anything else that you have to make sure in the stable safety-wise that's there to make everything? No, so basically the only time I worry about safety in stables is when you bring in young foals or weanlings for the first time after they've been separated from their mums, and you bring them in and they're not quite sure what they're doing. But I would always put them in boxes in pairs to start with, so they've always got a friend with them. And the other time, and the most important time for mares in stables, is of course when they're foaling and actually giving birth. And those boxes, as you saw when you were there, we're building a brand new foaling unit, and they're big boxes, and they have a little bit like the paddocks. They don't have square corners, they have rounded corners, so they can't lie down and get stuck in a corner, so you can't get to the foal to help with the delivery. And at that point they obviously want to have lots of straw. They have rubber matting underneath, so they're not lay on concrete if they were to go, if there wasn't enough straw. And it's a case in the stables of having no sharp objects and having good quality hay, water, feed, and all the essentials. And you've got the cameras in there as well, haven't you, so that you can watch them at all times? Yeah, we have cameras in our foaling boxes, as most stud farms would have, because when a mare gets close to foaling, mares are one of the only mammals in the world that they can go into the early stages of labour, but if they feel unsettled, if they feel nervous, if they're not happy, they can stop labour and they can wait. They can wait another 24 hours or 48 hours. Eventually, the foal has to come, but they are able to stop early
the early stages of labour if they're not happy with their surroundings. And the important thing is to make them feel comfortable and happy, but most importantly, like they're not being watched. Mares give birth 95% of the time at night, as they would in the wild. Because if you imagine, if you're a mare and you're giving birth and you're on the plains in Africa or wherever, you want to give birth overnight. So by the time the sun comes up and predators are out hunting, that your foal is up on its feet and able to run away. So the majority of mares will give birth overnight, and they'll give birth when they think it's quiet and safe and there's no one watching them and there are no predators around. So the easiest way for us to do that when they're in stables blocks is to, rather than be checking them and watching them all the time by keep looking over a stable door through a window at them when they know you're there because they can sense it, is to watch them on the camera. So they're left alone as much as possible, so they feel safe and happy, and then they'll lie down, and then they'll go into labour. And when they're in the final stages of labour and giving birth, we are then able to go and help and assist the mare to make sure there are no problems with the delivery and that everything is good with the foal when it's born.
Do you have straw or shavings when the foal's being delivered?
Definitely straw. If you imagine, no different to watching one born every minute. When a baby's born, it's covered in blood and yuck and mucus and all sorts, and it's no different with a foal. There's placenta and blood and yuck, and shavings just stick to it. So straw is very much the bedding of choice.
Where do you think you learn the most from your everything that you know?
I think it's something that builds up over a period of time. I spent 7 years in Ireland with Coolmore, and Coolmore obviously one of the world's leading, or if not the world's leading, breeding and racing establishments with Ballydoyle and Co. And I think probably my time in Ireland was my most important time. I worked on one of their stallion farms and worked with the stallions. I also spent 3 seasons running one of their foaling units, which was incredibly busy and very exciting. And I finished up being yearling manager in one of their yearling farms. So as a big farm, I got to experience everything. I got to work with the stallions. I got to foal mares, and I ended up specialising running one of the yearling farms. So that's my advice to anyone, is to try and get somewhere where you get a broad spectrum, because foaling might not be for you. It might be yearling or yearling work or prepping yearlings or breaking yearlings that you love. For other people, they might not enjoy that. It might be the foaling and the young foals that's their thing. So you want to get to a farm or get somewhere and get the experience of all of the different things that breeding horses can entail. And people either then end up specialising on one thing, because they absolutely love it or adore it, or you build a big portfolio of knowledge about everything that would hopefully then leave you in a position to be able to be a stud groom or stud manager, because you understand the whole process.
Who should we be looking out for stock-wise for Mr Araci's stud farm?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'd like to say all of them, because I believe in the horses that we have. We have some horses in training at the moment that I think are probably worth keeping an eye out for. We run a horse probably next week called Imrahor, who's a 3-year-old by Kingman, who we bred ourselves. He's rated 87 at the moment, but I think he's much better than that, and I hope he is a listed or group quality horse next year as a 4-year-old. We bred a Frankel colt who's in training with Roger Varian, and he is called Mr Fox, and he was 3rd on debut a couple of weeks ago as a 2-year-old. I think he'll be a horse to follow next year as a 3-year-old. And we put some nice yearlings in training as well, but it's a bit early to say with them. And regarding the breeding stock in the future, I'm very happy with the mares we have at the moment. One mare that stands out is Butterscotch. She's a lovely mare. We paid a lot of money for her in foal to Justify, and she has a beautiful Justify filly foal, who I believe I showed you at the farm, and she's stunning. And I hope we'll put her in training next year, but she's obviously a couple of years away from the racetrack. And Butterscotch is by Galileo, and she's actually for those of you that follow her racing, she's a full sister to a horse called Tiger Moth, who, when we bought the mare, he'd only ran once and was placed in a maiden. But since then, he's been second in the Irish Derby, and 10 days ago he was second in the Melbourne Cup down in Australia. So he's a very good horse, and she's a lovely mare, and with, I hope, a very, very exciting future.
So for anyone watching this who would like to get into breeding and what you do, what advice would you give them on how to go about that?
So there are ways into it. As I say, I came into it without a horsey background. No one in my family rides horses, had anything to do with horses. So the important thing, a lot of people think that, oh, if you're not born into it, if horses aren't your thing, if you don't grow up with horses, you can't. That's just not true. If it's your passion and you want to do it, you can. I'd find a local stud or riding stables or anywhere close to you where you might be able to get some experience and doing part-time or weekend work. There is obviously the British Racing School do courses if you have an interest in racing. The National Stud runs regular courses, training young people and elder people in training them up to be stud hands. And there are obviously colleges that do the equine science courses that I do and breeding related courses. So there's lots of ways into it, whether it be study or whether it be through hands-on experience. And my advice to anyone young that wants to do it is get as much experience as you can. Try use it to travel the world if you like. You know, I've worked in Australia, I've worked in Ireland, I've worked for 3 or 4 of the biggest stud farms in the world, and you get to see how things are done differently all around the world. You get to take the best, you take the best from one place to the next, and you form your own opinion as to the way things should be done. So I'd get out there, try and build a CV, try and travel, experience different things, and I wouldn't put anyone off doing it. Racing and breeding has to be, a way of life and a love, because it's always going to be more than just a job. It's never going to be Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. It's weekends, it's night time, it's mares foaling at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I promise you, if it's what you want to do and you enjoy it, there is no better feeling than bringing a new life into the world, when it be foaling a mare, and then following that foal all the way through to when it's a yearling and till when it goes into training, and then maybe going to the races and watching it run and following it. I mean, you get a sense of ownership from it, even if you don't own the horse yourself, and it's a wonderful thrill. And I would encourage anyone that's thinking about it to chuck your hat in the ring and have a go.
And if someone would like to have a look about, Mr Araci and the stud farm, is there a website that anyone can visit?
So currently, the Old Mill Stud website is under construction, because the office, as you saw, the office is being torn down and rebuilt at the moment. So there will be a website, but currently there is not at the moment. Certainly, my email address is spearsbloodstock@gmail.com, which is SPEERS bloodstock@gmail.com, and within reason, I'm quite happy to answer anyone's questions if they have questions from this interview. And again, within reason, if anyone's ever visiting Newmarket and they want to get in touch, in the same way I showed you around, I'm happy to give people an introduction to Newmarket, to stud farming, and if I can point people in the right direction, I will.
And I can even say myself, when I first met you, I didn't know anything about the breeding, about the stud farms, and even just you showing me round was incredible, because I learned so much, and even from this I've learned a lot.
I think that's a really interesting point, that a lot of people feel that it's inaccessible, and they watch the world on Twitter and the world on racing, and they think, I don't know how I could ever do it, how I could ever see these people. But actually, the majority of people, even if it's the likes of John Gosden or Juddmonte or whatever, if you get in touch with people, most people are happy to share knowledge, and they're happy to help people, because we want more people in our industry. We want our industry to be more diverse. We want more young people. We want more women. We want more ethnic minorities. The more people involved in racing and breeding, and the bigger the appeal to the public, the better. We want people involved. So don't be frightened to reach out, because I think you're probably finding as you're going on your journey, Hannah, that actually people are more than happy to talk to you and share their knowledge. And so my advice is, if you have an interest, don't be frightened to ask, because people will support you.
And there's something out there, I find, for everyone, you know, like you said, if it was breeding you're into, or looking after the young ones, or even if it's just mucking out, I feel like in the industry there is something for everyone.
There is. And as I say, if you have a passion and you enjoy it and it's something you want to explore, there are plenty of opportunities out there. And there are systems set up now through the National Stud and the British Racing School and whatever. There is a way that you can go from no knowledge to having a job in racing and a job in breeding in a fairly short period of time, because the building blocks have been put in place by the establishments with training courses as well.
Oh no, I can't tell you, Robbie, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much, because I've learned a lot again.
Well, look, I hope I haven't waffled on too much. And as I say, I hope some of it's interesting. And as I say, I look forward to any responses and helping anyone that might be interested in our industry. Hannah, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
I'll continue to watch you building your house on Instagram. It entertains me. And hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Yes, we'll do. Thank you so much, Rob.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away with me.